Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Ruth Ozeki, it's a delight to have you here. This is the fifth and last installment of this semester's season of Point Counterpoint. It takes a little while to put all that sentence together. A series of conversations, of public conversations, devoted to exploring in depth the minds, the thoughts, the views, the nuances of personalities that influence us and whose opinions we don't necessarily share. That is a crucial aspect of the initial mandate, the mission of Point Counterpoint, funded by the class of 1970, that started in the year 2016 as a result of a seismic, the first presidential election that transformed us all, in that for many of us in small bubble-like colleges like Amherst felt as if there were parallel realities, that things were happening in the country that we were not paying attention to, and vice versa. The hope was to bring to our space individuals who we often had very different opinions in terms of theirs, and that we could listen to and engage and be patient and have a dialogue. Each season since 2016 has had another theme, and this season's theme is democracy in the English language. Just as the election approaches in November, the big question is, what is it that is tying us together as a nation? Are there still some commonalities? There's a new movie, as you know, called Civil War, that for now is only a movie, that speaks to the tensions that exist in us. We had first John McWhorter, the linguist and New York Times columnist, then the former president and publisher of Merriam-Webster, John Morse, Dan Brown of the Da Vinci Code, and also an alum, an Amherst alum. We had last week a Ukrainian-American poet, Ilya Kaminsky, who is, among other things, as he presented, a hard of hearing, and an activist for that community. And today, delighted to have Ruth Ozeki with us, first-rate American novelist of Japanese in American descent. We'll explore all those things. I want to just thank everybody for allowing us to be here. There's higher education, institutions of higher education are going through a very important rethinking of our process, and I think society is having a rethinking of what we do in places like this. The fact that we are having time to listen to one another when there is so much that is happening nationwide, I think it is very important. There are two levels for this conversation, what we're all going to be doing here, and also people online. There are many, and Ruth and I are going to be in a dialogue, and after that dialogue, we're going to open it up to questions and comments from the audience. Because we have also folks online, even though it doesn't feel that you need it, but there's a microphone that Heloise will be circulating. Heloise has been helping very much on putting all this together. Just wait for that, and that will allow for the people online to hear you. Finally, I want to thank everybody, Amanda and Marie and Austin and Marcus and David and everybody that has been behind the curtains to put this, to make this possible. We're going to start, Ruth, you and I were talking about this, with a poem. You are not known as a poet. Maybe push it and create a green.
Got it.
There you
Is
go.
that good? Okay.
You have a poem that you and I were talking about it, and I'd love to start with that.
Sure. So this is I'm not a poet. I don't identify as a poet. But when I think about it, when I first started writing, when I first started thinking about writing when I was a little child, I did write poetry. And I wrote poetry because I was a little, half Japanese, half American little girl in New Haven, Connecticut, and people who looked like me didn't write novels, even though that's what I wanted to write. But I felt kind of culturally entitled to the haiku form. And so that's what I started writing. And I was never much of a poet, but I do enjoy it from time to time. And since the topic of our conversation is language, I thought this might be a good way to start.
Terrific.
Okay. So this was published in the Massachusetts Review. And the title is Thoughts in Language. 1. If language is the line dividing us from them, then words fail me, and I grow molluscan, or bang my brain against its limbic limits, or ape and parody poetry, even as I fail to articulate this one sigh to you. 2. You say you is the necessary other, buried at the heart of every act of language, making me utterly what I am every time I open my mouth. 3. What is this, if not ritual? These objects inherited, significantly placed, sounds untenable, long breaths the ancestors spoke against their deaths, and yours and mine. Breathe in time and exhale praises, or in silence, the holy mystery at the core of all this, so that when I offer you this stone, for example, you cup your hand to receive a smooth, cold weight.
Beautiful.
That's it.
There are many things that you sent me that poem last night, and I read it, and it sparked all kinds of thoughts. I want to use it as an anchor and go in different directions. I want to talk to you about the you and the I and the shifting perspectives that the various parts of the poem offered. But I want to station myself on one particular word, because you and I know each other for some years, and when I think of you, that word comes to mind and feels very vivid, and that's the word silence. I wonder, Ruth, in the many conversations that we've had here with the previous participants, we talked about the language of race and the language of religion, the language of gender, the way that the English language can be a tool to destroy others, but also a way to bring them together. But we haven't talked about the silence or the silences within the English language, or the silences with other languages. Among your many books that I adore, there's one in particular that you and I have been talking, and that unites us. It's called The Face, a Time Code. By the way, thank you also to Amherst Books. All the books are available here, including this one that was published by Restless Books. Self-promotion here. It's
Yay,
really,
Restless.
It's really extraordinary. So if I could ask you, Ruth, to define the word silence.
Define the word silence. Well, thinking about it dualistically, I would define it in opposition to noise, to language, to voice, to all of the things that language does, which is to differentiate and to separate. So I would I think of silence as a kind of unifying force, right? Silence, for me, very often I think of silence in a Zen context, right? And in a long meditation retreat, for example, I mean, we spend days in silence, and it's always very interesting because in that silence there's a very strong sense of of oneness, right? And the trouble only starts when the retreat is over and we start talking to each other, and that's when distinctions start to be made, right? But language is really, language. One of the functions of language is to tell this from that, right? To separate things, to make these kinds of distinctions. To tell me from you, to tell us from them, right? And so then the opposite of that would be this kind of more, to use Dogen's language, a kind of a more all-inclusive type of, an all-inclusive space that we can kind of coexist in.
Have you had a relationship with silence that has changed over time when you were young in college at Smith, or even before as a child at home as the only daughter of two linguists? And then when you became a filmmaker, and then when you started writing novels, and now that you are retired, but not fully retired,
I'm trying.
With the many moments that you spend writing books, what is that relationship with silence over time?
Gosh, that's so interesting, because it's very clear to me. My parents, as you said, were both linguists. They led very separate, very silent lives. So at home, there was not a lot of conversation. Each person sort of retreated to his or her own sort of solitude. My dad was, it wasn't hostile or anything like that, but we all had things that we were doing, so that we didn't really talk a lot to each other. It was a very, very silent place, and I remember too. I think when I was a child, I'm probably misremembering this, but I remember being a quiet child. If you ask friends or former teachers, they'll probably say no, she was, chattering away. But my recollection was of being quiet, partly because I didn't really feel, and I think this was part of, the kind of inherited stereotype of being, an Asian girl, that I wasn't entitled to language. I mean, it's similar to the haiku story that I told. I wanted to write long, complex novels because those are the kinds that I like to read. But, what I did instead was limit myself to a poetic form that comprises mostly silence, right? And so, it wasn't really until I started learning Japanese and went to Japan when I was in college. And I think it was the first time that people saw me as being a Westerner. They saw me as being American, right? Whereas when I was growing up, people always looked at me and they saw me as being Japanese, right? And so I kind of took on all of the stereotypes of a little Japanese girl. Silence being one of those. But when I went to Japan, I remember feeling tremendously liberated because as an American, of course, I could be loud, right? I could be loud, I could be raucous, I could be, I could have a sense of humor, which had never occurred to me before. This was long before Margaret Cho, or there weren't any funny Asians back when I was growing up. And so that was part of it, right? And so it was a tremendous sort of feeling of liberation to realize that, I can be all of those things that I never felt entitled to be up until now. And so there was a kind of balancing, I think, there that happened when I could kind of, it sounds odd, but I could reclaim my my white half, my Caucasian half. I could take up space. I could make noise. I could have authority in a way that I'd never been able to have before. So that was and the word authority there, I think, is important because that extends to writing. When I was growing up, again, I think Joy Luck Club was published when I was in my 30s. So it wasn't like there was an Asian American literary canon there that I could read and, sort of aspire to be part of. That just didn't exist. But once again, when I started to feel this slight correction and this sense of having being entitled to have a voice and to make noise, that's really when I started to be able to have a voice in the world, and that's when I started making films. That's when I started writing. Yeah. So that was a kind of a balancing thing that happened there.
Going back to the scene of the family that you were painting a short while ago, your mother was fluent in Japanese, and she also was fluent in English. Yeah. Your father spoke. You were telling me during dinner, he knew at least all of the European languages and was fluent in half a dozen of them. Yeah. Do you, and yet silence in the house, the three individuals, and then your father was a very important figure in Mayan culture as a linguist and in anthropologist too. But
he was a linguistic anthropologist, yeah. And he taught at Yale. Yeah.
Do you think, Ruth, that silence is experienced differently in different cultures? I'm trying to push you beyond these different aspects of being Japanese and American and loud or quiet or gaining your voice. Do you think that there is no such thing as universal silence? The beginning of your poem is about the difference between the language of humans and the language of animals. Do different languages experience silence differently?
I wish I knew more languages to really be able to answer that. And again, I think the only other culture that I know well is the Japanese culture. I would say that silence is very different in Japan than it is in the West.
How so?
Well, okay. For example, if you're on a crowded train or you're walking down the street, people will not be talking on their phones in an audible way. Right. That just simply would never happen. That they're kind of walking down the street, jabbering away on their phone. That would just never happen. There's a sense of, in the same way that you don't take up space and intrude upon somebody's personal space, you also don't intrude upon their auditory space. And so when somebody does, it's very conspicuous. And I think I really, growing up in the household that I did, I appreciated that and, have always found it difficult to be in spaces where people aren't respecting my right to silence. Like, for example, with, as soon as the summer comes around, the leaf blowers come out, right? And,
oh, that's
right?
a nightmare, right?
It's a nightmare, right? It's a nightmare. And then, and then the snow plows and there's always this kind of intrusion, right?
Of the outside.
Of the outside, yeah.
Yeah. When you are writing, at the different stages of your writing, do you need silence? Do you write with music? Describe to me the soundscape of your spaces where you write.
Usually what I'm trying to do is drown out the leaf blowers.
So by closing the windows?
No, I have a pair of Bose noise-canceling headphones, very high-end noise canceling. That, for some reason, that really drives me nuts. So that, I just finished writing a story called Leaf Blower. Yeah.
So it's very present to you right now.
It's my revenge story. But So so I very often, if there is ambient noise like that, like the dog barking next door, or leaf blowers or something like that, I'll wear noise canceling headphones. I do listen to music,
While writing.
but only music that's not vocal. So ambient instrumental music.
And is it repetitive? Do you hear the same symphony or the same jazz composition or the same relaxing tunes in order to bring a certain state of creativity?
Yeah, that's changed too since streaming technology has really taken over. Back in the olden days, we used to have records, but then we used to have CDs, and so yes, I would play the same CD. I would have a CD that somehow, and so I would choose music very intentionally, and the music would be like a soundtrack to whatever novel I was writing, and so I would be able to play I'd play the CD, play the album, in order to sort of move myself into that fictional space, and into that mood, right? And so every one of my novels has a secret soundtrack. A secret soundtrack that goes with it, yeah. And although it's not actually that secret because I think they're published and available on Spotify.
Yeah.
If you know how to search for them.
Could you say, for instance, A Tale for the Time Being, what was the sound or any one of that you choose?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, I'd have to think. But I mean, for example, the Book of Form and Emptiness, the Benny Goodman, Carnegie Hall concert was certainly part of that soundtrack. But also David Bowie's kind of spaceman. That's also part of it. I mean, it's pretty wide ranging.
Yeah.
And so I might not listen to those songs on repeat because you can't. You have to be careful not to wear out a song, right? I mean, if you wear it out, then it's no good. You have to throw it away.
And if you hear right now Benny Goodman, do the characters of the novel come back to you? And the process of how they were shaped?
Yeah. I'll remember things that might not even be in the book, but that that I knew about the characters that never actually made it onto the page.
Your novels are polyphonic and they change perspectives in a kind of Walt Whitman-like way. You see the multitudes, and the different perspectives. Do you hear the voices? At what point in the process of shaping the novels do the voices of those first-person narrators or third-person narrators become truly not only the word used voice to define another character, but a voice in your head?
Usually a book starts with a voice. And it's not a voice, it's not like I hear it with my ear as though it's coming from the outside. It's not like that kind of voice hearing. I've had that experience. When my dad died, I used to hear his voice as if he were outside me, as if he were speaking. But it wasn't like that. These are, it's more of a kind of tone that I hear. It's like I'm hearing it with my mind almost, but it's very distinct. And so, for example, with A Tale for the Time Being, I remember, I think the first words I wrote down were, "Hi, my name is Now, and I'm a time being. Do you know what a time being is? Well, if you give me a moment, I will tell you. A time being is someone who lives in time, and that means you and me and everyone else who is or was or ever will be," right? And I can hear her kind of chattering on like this, right?
When does that voice appear to you?
It right from the start. I mean, as soon as she introduced herself, she was there, and then it's just a matter. I knew pretty quickly that she was in she was in this maid cafe. I knew what kind of coffee she drank. I knew how she drank it. I knew what she was wearing. I knew who was sitting kind of near her. I can kind of picture it all now.
So help me with this, Ruth. Are you writing her story, or is she dictating the story to you?
Well, if I said that she was dictating it to me, I'd sound mad. So, I try not to use that. And it's not quite like that either. It's, of course she's not dictating it. It's not a kind of Pirandello situation where the characters are like up there, in
The author.
What? In search of the author. Although sometimes it feels that way, right? It feels like the characters are up there in some sort of Pirandellian soup, and they're looking, remember those old movies about the Greek gods, and they would, they'd be up there on Olympus, and they'd look through a hole in the clouds down there. That's what I kind of picture.
So the novelist is not that.
Right, looking for a novelist who's actually, listening. Oh, look. She's not scrolling through TikTok. Let's parasitize her mind, It's not like that.
Yeah.
Or maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe it is like that. Maybe it's exactly
if I push it
like
a little
that.
further,
Yeah.
is this that the characters have, every so often you hear in a very valid in resonant way, a writer who says, well, the characters are the ones that are in control, and I am following them, or maybe I shape the context, and now I just follow what the characters are saying.
Yeah, that is, in my experience, that's very true. Not with all the characters, but with a lot of the characters, with the really, with this strong character. Well, and by the end of the book, really all of the characters, are discrete, characters with agency, and they know better what they're doing than I do. And when I try to interfere too much, that's when the writing process kind of shuts down. But it's interesting because growing up when I did, this was the way literature was taught, I think, too. But I came away from my English classes with this sense that real novelists wrote in an omniscient third person, voice, right? That was the true voice of the novel, right? And of course, I wanted to do that too, right? But every time I've tried to do that, I've failed. And so the first time that happened was in All Over Creation. And it's a book about power and control, our control, humans' control over nature. And it seemed to me the perfect vehicle to exercise a kind of godlike, omniscient perspective. And so I went into the novel thinking, I'm going to nail it this time. And I think that book starts out with this grand statement, something like, it starts with the earth. How could it not? Imagine the planet as a split peach, et cetera, going on like this. And I was having a great time doing that, exercising my godlike powers, until, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 pages in, one of the characters basically just kind of dug her heels in and decided that she wanted to be the narrator. And so then we had this kind of power struggle back and forth, and for some reason she was also uncooperative because she would only speak in the second person, you, right? And that was not part of the plan at all, because you is not really a great sustainable voice to use for an entire novel. Anyway, so we started having these, this dynamic between us. And I did what I think you have to do in this case, which is to, give it to her. She wants to take it, fine. Go, run with it, And so that's what I ended up doing. I had to make changes as a result. I had to give her kind of a, I still liked that voice, that authoritative voice, but I had to then give her a kind of educational upgrade to so that she could be capable of using a voice like that. And then she started eventually talking in the first person as well. So she alternated. When she was talking about herself as a child, she used the second person. And when she was talking about herself as an adult, after she after she comes home, then she starts using the first person. And then she ends up being the first person narrator throughout the rest of the book. And then the other characters, and there were several, were written in a close, intimate, subjective third person voice, which is not that, that godlike, omniscient voice, but it's much more intimate. Right?
So if the concept that you were talking about that was taught to you in college is omniscient voice, what you have developed over all this wonderful book is what?
Well, I mean, it's a kind of dialogic narration, I think. It's characters who are not necessarily speaking directly to one another, but they are telling a story in tandem in some sort of way. Yeah.
You were talking, I want to just stay for a second in something you said, a power struggle between you and the character. And you said, I felt a power struggle, and then I said, all right, take it away. Yeah. It's yours. Just go a little farther with what that power struggle was. Were you frustrated? Were you stuck? Did you feel that this character was rebellious? Did you not like the character?
I didn't like her, no. I didn't like her. She was the character who was, it's always going to be the character who's closest to you, to me, right? Who's going to give me the most trouble, right? I think that's true for everybody. It's the quote, autobiographical character who is going to be the one who gives you the most trouble. The other characters tend to be, very generous and compliant, right? But it's the one who for some reason is reflecting something of yours that are, that you're going to have trouble with. And in this case, there was just something when I would write her scenes, they just felt, they did not have life. I don't know how else they felt forced. They felt cold. They felt distant. They felt, there was a kind of distance there. And it's, not to get super psychological about it, but, there's probably something about, me as the writer not wanting to reveal, and sort of pushing the character off. And this has happened with all, in the first book, it was the Jane Takagi Little, the Japanese-American documentary filmmaker character who, is patently autobiographical. In the second, and people were always asking me, they were always, and I knew they would. And so that's why I made her, because we shared a race, we shared this kind of mixed race identity. And we shared a job because she was a documentary filmmaker and so was I. So I knew that they were going to do that, which is why I made her 6 feet tall and gave her green hair so that people could tell us apart, right? And so that didn't work. And so in the second book, in All Over Creation, the character was a character who ended up being called Yumi, right? Which was a kind of, in my mind, a play on the you and me, right? And I basically made her kind of so dysfunctional that I thought readers would never dare
but it didn't
suggest, and that didn't work either. Yeah, they still thought that it was me. And so then in the third book, I think I just eventually, again, gave up, and the autobiographical character is named Ruth. and I just...
And then readers don't tell you it's you.
No, readers do think it's... of course they do. They think it's me. And rightly so, because, Ruth and I, we share a job description. We also share a husband. We share a lot.
Now, Ruth, there is... Ruth and some wonderful students and I went to dinner before, and it was a beautiful conversation. There's a moment in the conversation that you were talking about the death of your parents and a crucial moment in your life, and how you dedicated yourself to being next to them. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said, that was the time where I could have had children, but instead I was with my parents, something of the sort. And so it was resonating in my mind when all these characters, some of them closer to you, but some of them forcibly fighting with you, they are alter egos, but could they be children too?
Well, I mean, I think, I don't know. I've never had children, so I don't know. But to my mind, you brought up Whitman, I contain multitudes. And I think we all do, not just me, And I think that's what that's what characters are. They're facets of self that get acted out somehow on the page. Because if they weren't, then how else would you breathe life into them? If you don't know what is motivating a character, or you can't imagine it, right? And I think too, the ability to kind of really imagine what a character is going through, that type of intersubjective, imagination, right? That's what's necessary in order to bring a character to life. And I think it's because we all have that capacity. We all have these, intersubjective, imaginations. That's why literature works, right? If we weren't able to do that, literature wouldn't exist, because we wouldn't know what to do with it, right? Yeah.
But it would be a fallacy, or maybe, Ruth, it would be reductionist. Let me see if I can present this next question in a way that I myself think is not, you're not writing autobiography thinly veiled as fiction, but you have not written also an autobiography. Why not simply write? What would be the difference between Ruth writing an autobiography per se and what you do here, that is find different voices inside you, different versions of yourself, some you'd like, some you don't like, and turn them into that imaginary universe?
That's just more interesting. It's more interesting to make stuff up, and but it's also, I think, too, about, it's about a contract with the reader. I mean, every book, again, is a dialogue, right? It's a conversation that I'm having with readers, and I don't know who those readers are, but there's a unspoken contract between, not unspoken, it's actually spoken, but it's a contract between me and the reader. And if it says novel on it, right, then that means that I'm allowed more leeway to create and imagine, right? But if it says autobiography or memoir on it, then the contract is that I'm going to the best of my ability, tell you the truth, whatever that might be. And so, it's a constraining force. And sometimes I think, the face is a memoirish sort of piece of something. Yeah.
Before I go to the memoir, I'd love to hear from you, Ruth, about, it takes you about 10 years to write a book.
Don't rub it in.
And 10 years is a long time, and maybe it's not long enough in certain cases. I want you to walk us through what the gestation is, but I also want Ruth to tell us about the types of dreams that you have in those 10 years. If the dreams in any way contribute to how a character of the plot or the voice or any aspect, when I am intently and intensely writing a book, my dreams are very agitated. And I wake up with pain in my body. I slept too much on this side, or how are you? What those two things?
Interesting. Well, they're not quite 10 years, like 8 years, 9 years. Okay, almost 10 years. I just keep hoping that's going to change. I mean, it has to change, right? Because I'm getting old and I need to write more books. And so if I don't pick up the pace here, we're going to run out of time, right? So I'm doing my best here. I'm also really trying to write short now. I'm trying now. Finally, I'm trying. After teaching short story for 10 years, I'm actually now trying to learn how to write them. So in any case, 10 years, yeah. It's depends on the. I mean, it completely depends on the book. The book that was I think the most challenging for me was A Tale for the Time Being. I started writing that. I mean, I can see traces dating back as early as 9/11. Okay, so in other words, 2001, right? I can see some references. You know, the character of the Tokotai, the kamikaze pilot, right, was a character who came to mind that early, right? And it was, of course, after the bombing of the World Trade Center when, you know, all of these pundits were saying, oh, it's just like the kamikaze, which it wasn't, right? So that, you know, and that's when I started researching, you know, that particular phenomenon. I think I first started writing the book. That was when my parents died, too. My parents died in that, you know, my mother died finally in 2004. And there was a period after that where I just couldn't write. And that's really when I mean, I'd already been practicing Zen. I was already quite serious about it. And the reason I started getting serious about Zen was because I needed something to, you know, something to kind of hold me up while I helped my parents, you know, through the last years of their life. So it was a kind of strengthening practice for me. But in any case, the upshot was that I just didn't think I was going to write another book. And it wasn't until it was through Zen that the novel came to me. I was studying, you know, particularly Dogen Zenji's fascicles, and was studying a fascicle called Time Being, right? And it was reading that fascicle and sitting with it in silence for long periods of time that started me thinking about, you know, about time as being, right? And especially since I had just lost my dearest time beings, my two parents, right? So this idea of, you know, finitude and impermanence, you know, was very much a part of, you know, what I was thinking and feeling. And so, you know, what happens is that all of these ideas start to constellate, right? You know, and then Oliver sends me an article about maid cafes, and so that enters the constellation. And then, you know, I read something about crows, and that enters, and, you know, and the constellations just start to grow like that. And eventually from that kind of, you know, and it is kind of, in the book talks about these great garbage patches, right? That's what my mind is like. Right. It's like this great garbage patch with all of these elements, you know, bits of garbage swimming around, right, spiraling around. And then from that's where the voice comes from, right? It comes out of that. And so then from all of that, this voice started to, you know, I started to hear this character, you know, hi, my name is Now. It's like, oh, okay. And then, you know, following that. Then I knew that Now was, you asked me to run you through it. It's not going to take me 10 years to do this. I'll try to do it more quickly, but, you know, I'm hearing the voice, I'm writing it, she's a chatterbox, it's easy, it's going great, right? I know that she's writing a diary in this, you know, she's writing a diary. She's writing a diary to some unknown reader. So it goes back to the structure of the poem, right? This calling out, you know, into the universe, you know, who is she talking to? She didn't know. She had this idea that she was just going to cast her diary out into the world and it would be picked up by some unknown reader who, you know, would find it, and, you know, that was her ambition. She didn't know who that reader was, and so neither did I, right? And so then it's my job as the writer to try to figure this out, okay? So then it ended up being a little bit like a casting call for a film, right? You have this character, unknown reader, who needs to be cast, and so then I would think about a character. You know, a character would pop to mind, and I'd think, oh, that's it. And so I'd introduce the character and have the character find Now's diary and start to read it, and then the character would react. And so then I would have, you know, the character's chapter. That, you know, the unknown reader's chapter would come in. And so then, again, the story would would grow in tandem like that, right? And that would be great until about whatever, like page 50 or 60 or something. And suddenly one day, for no particular reason, I'd look at the manuscript and realize, no, that's the wrong reader. For some reason, it was just like, I'd been building this fictional world and then it just goes flat. Right, and which is always a terrible moment, and you realize, you keep thinking, oh, I must, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do that, it never works. And so then, I would unzip it, throw that reader away, despair for a while, and then think of a new reader, introduce that new reader, and create that again, right? And so then that would be fine until it wasn't. And, this process went on for about 5 years with about as many different readers. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 different unknown readers in that location, in that role. Then one of the problems was that the reader, every time the unknown reader became too specific, in other words, every time the unknown reader really developed into a character, right? The way a character needs to, that was when the balance got thrown off, right? And so every iteration, the reader got flatter and flatter and more like a kind of a cipher, like a caricature, until I finished a draft of the book, right, with an unknown reader in place who had no name, who had no gender, who had no job, basically was stripped of all the characteristics of a good character. But it had finished, right? I mean, the book had an arc, it had a beginning, it had an end, it had this disastrous cipher of an unknown reader, but, I was telling myself that this was very clever and postmodern and, hoping that there was something interesting going on here, theoretically. There wasn't. And my agent told me that it really wasn't working. Everybody who tried to read it said, no, it's not working. But so that's when, I thought, oh, well, we'll just give it to my editor, Carol DeSanti, and she can help us she can help me fix it. Just as I was about to do that, the earthquake and tsunami and the meltdown at Fukushima happened. Okay. And so that was one of those moments that caused a rift in time, in the same way that 9/11 caused a rift in time, in the same way that the pandemic caused a rift in time. It changed everything. It changed the conversation. And, I don't know whether you remember, you probably do, after 9/11, there was this conversation that, sprung up amongst New York writers, asking, is irony dead? Right? Do you remember that? The death of irony, right? Because who can possibly be ironic after something like this? And nobody knew how to write about New York for the longest time after that. And so that's, what happened after the earthquake. I mean, I had friends and family and people in Japan who I was, I was really worried about. And so, I just sat there. I sat there and, watched all of that footage of the earthquake and tsunami and and then the meltdown started to happen. I mean, it was, it was awful, right? And I realized in the course of that week or 2 weeks, that, in post-tsunami time, that this book that I had just spent 8 years working on or something like that was just no longer appropriate. I could not go forward with it, right? Because it was, it was kind of, there were clever elements to it, but it wasn't, it was kind of like, it just wasn't appropriate. It was not the kind of book I wanted to, to put out into the world. And so I took it back and sat with it for a while. And a lot of silence, a lot of, it was tough. And then I thought, well, maybe now could go out on her own. Maybe she doesn't need a reader, maybe the readers are out there, right? That didn't seem right either. And so then Oliver and I were having a conversation and about this, and he pointed out that, that the earthquake and the tsunami and the meltdown at Fukushima had kind of broken the world, right? It had kind of caused a rift in time. It had broken the world, and certainly had broken the fictional world of my book. And so the only way forward was to acknowledge the brokenness and to sort of bring that event into the book itself, right? And the way that the way that you would acknowledge the brokenness, or that you would allow a fictional world to be broken and to continue to be broken, is to step into it yourself as a real person, as a real character, right? So that when people read it, they would never know, is this a fiction or is this real, right? And so that ended up being that's what convinced me that this time I do need to step into it as Ruth, right? And, sort of own that role, right? And move forward. So I did. And I had I think it was like a 650-page manuscript that I unzipped. I threw half of it away. And then I started to write the Ruth and Oliver sections in like that, right? Knit them together. That process took me about 6 months. So I had, much faster. Yeah. So this is not an efficient way to write a novel. I'm not recommending this, right? But on the other hand, I realize now, looking back at it, that it was necessary, even though I didn't know that at the time. And the reason I say that is because, and again, it goes back to this idea of a dialogic structure and about meaning and being emerging as part of a dialogue, right? That every reader who read, all of these unknown readers who read Now's diary and reacted to it, caused a shift in her, right? Because then she would react, even though she wasn't, acknowledging it directly. They weren't communicating directly, but there was still this kind of feeling of dialogue going on. So she would react. So, for example, when one of the readers was a kind of prurient older man who was really interested in kind of her sexuality, she became more sexual, right? And so the different characters were able to elicit parts of her, right, that I could never have really thought of on my own had I not been, working through the vehicle of those unknown readers. And so the palimpsest, in other words, the palimpsest of all of those unknown readers, I can read that book and I can tell you, oh yeah, that came from this reader, that came from this reader, right?
And your dreams?
The dreams. When I'm writing, I don't have, I think of fiction as being a dream. That it is the dream. And I mean, I think Jung talked about this, the act of imagination, right? That when I'm deep into fiction writing, I think that the imagination that I'm channeling is so deep in my unconscious, right? That it doesn't come out in dream form for me. It doesn't come out in the, sleeping
That means
dreams.
You don't remember your dreams?
I do remember my dreams, but usually not when I'm writing.
Yes,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, Ruth, you've been talking about time and the fracture of time and the time being and the different voices. And in the face, which is called a time code, you create this experiment that is to sit in front of a mirror for 3 hours on a row to look at your face, to look attentively at your face. It comes from an article you've read or some comment that you see of a professor who says that in order to have her students or his students, I forget, really understand a painting in a museum, the student should spend 3 hours in front of that painting. That's right. And really go through all kinds of emotions. And at the beginning, you replace the Buddha for the mirror. And then you clean it and you do all sorts of things. And then you sit and look at your face and you meditate all kinds of things connected with your face. Among them, you say that that you're aging, that you have wrinkles, that you don't put makeup.
That was 10 years ago. It only gets worse.
And you play with a cone that is what was your face before you were born, and what was your face before your parents were born. And so I find the vision of your face as the mirror itself, our faces as the mirrors of who we are, exquisite in its richness. I want to ask you so many things about this, but I have to narrow it. The word person means mask in Latin. The face that we have is what people see. How do you see your face now in the mirror when you see yourself, Ruth? Are you comfortable? You just talked about how you want to accelerate the writing. I come from a father who was an soap opera star, who hated aging, could not find a way to age. Have you found a way to age?
Well, there's not much you can do about it, right? So you might, you kind of have to.
Resign yourself?
Well, it's not even resigning. It's what is. And so there's no point in denying that, right? Any attempt to deny what is only going to cause more suffering. So it doesn't make any sense to do that, right? So it just is what is. I certainly notice, I notice, and but I don't look away. I don't actually obsess over it either. But it's just there. It's
because there's
look,
a moment
there she is.
There's a moment in the book where you say, I don't like looking at myself in the mirror.
At the time,
and yet
that's
you're
right.
putting yourself for
that's
3 hours in front of the mirror.
That's right. That's right.
Do you have has your relationship with mirrors changed?
I think it has.
Yeah.
And I'm laughing because listen, it was an act of desperation because your editor at the time, Joshua.
Yeah.
Joshua, nicest guy in the world. He used to be the editor at Restless. He had commissioned me to write this article, right? And I can't remember how many words it was supposed to be. And he had kind of lured me with the bait of a Borges quote,
yes.
right? That beautiful Borges quote. And I thought, oh yeah, this sounds really interesting. And so we decided that I would do this. And then I realized what it was that he had actually asked me to do, right? Which was to write an essay about my face, right? However I wanted to do it, but I had to write like a lot of words about my face. And the idea of doing this just seemed terrible to me. And so I avoided it for about 2 years. You didn't know.
I remember that.
Do you remember this?
Yes.
And Joshua kept sending me these lovely, polite emails asking me, so how's it going? And finally, after about 2 years, 2.5 years, I just in desperation did what any good Buddhist will do, which is, if there's something that you don't want to do, that you're resisting, you better sit down and look at it. Right. And so that's why I ended up, I did that literally, and I had read that article by Jennifer Roberts, who was the art history professor at Harvard, who had that exercise, right? And I thought, okay, that's fine. Let's just do this, right?
The quote by Borges.
Yeah, read that. Yeah, it's
such
beautiful.
a
It's on the
quote.
flap.
A man sets out to draw the world. As the years go by, he peoples a space with images of provinces and kingdoms and mountains and bays, ships and islands and fishes, rooms, instruments, stars, houses, and individuals. A short time before he dies, he discovers that the patient labyrinth of lines he has traced is actually his face. It's just a beautiful.
It's beautiful, right? Yeah, it was great bait. I went for it immediately. Yeah, yeah. So that's how that happened. Your question, though, I got off topic.
The question
there.
was really about if you are more comfortable.
Oh,
There's a moment
right.
in the book
Yeah.
also you say that in Western culture, men and women age very differently. that you are, there's a beautiful section in the book where you talk about growing up with a father who was American and a mother who was Japanese at a time when this mix was not accepted, or it was not common, and how things had changed, but how you were made fun of. You play with the shape of your eyes in different ways, how the perceptions of Asian eyes, Chinese, Japanese eyes. You're very playful, but you're also very serious about your face as the map of who you are, but as the map of the world.
Well, I was taking the Borges, quote literally. I think at that time too, I must have been 59, right? Which is that's a tricky age for a face. It's when the face starts to really change, for decades in between there. From about the age of like 20 to the age of, almost 60, your face doesn't change all that much, right? But then it's like puberty, right? Except in reverse. Suddenly there's this kind of like, huge physical changes that start to kick in, right? And so I was just on the cusp of that. And I think I was, and I wasn't as, I was sort of in a position where I was on stage a lot, and, there's this kind of whole public face, the public persona that that I had to engage with over and over, and so that was, I think, kind of difficult. But the thing that really helped me, I think, more than anything else was, again, the Zen. The Zen factor. When I first ordained. When I was ordained as a priest, one of the things you have to do is shave your head.
You talk about
and I
it
talk
in the
about
book.
that in there. Yeah.
And you talk about how different it is for a man to shape his hair and a woman to shape his hair.
I got kind of bent out of shape about that. Just as we were leading up to the ordination ceremony, we were sitting in a retreat. And so it was like 7 days or 8 days of silent meditation. And I was getting really pissed because I had nice hair, right? And I just thought, this sucks, because it's like one thing for guys to, it's fine if a guy shaves his head. There's no stigma attached to it. Guys go bald all the time, and it's it just happens, right? My husband is completely bald. Anyway, he always jokes that he looks more Buddhist than I do. But the thing is that for women to shave their head, it means either cancer, right? It's either you're ill or you're a criminal. Right? It's a punishment. There's all of the stigma attached to it. And so I was getting all bent out of shape about the kind of inherent sexism in the, built into this. Again, I just finally got tired of hearing myself go on. And so I grabbed a couple of friends and we went and just cut it all off and shaved it. Yeah. And it was wonderful. I loved it. I remember I went, because I was covered with little bits of hair, and I went and took a shower. And it was the first time that I had been able to wash this part of me. And there was no differentiation between the hair and the rest of my body, right? I didn't need like a special product for this part, and it was just this continuous me, right? And there was no place to hide anymore, and that felt beautiful. Great. Yeah. It felt so good.
We're going to open it up to the audience now, and the microphone, thanks to again Heloise, will be going. Before that, I want to ask you just two quick questions, Ruth. What is the center of your face? Is the center? At one point, you say it's your eyes, but it's your eyes the center of your face, your nose. Does your face have a center?
I mean, it's always tempting to say the nose because that's a singular point, right? But, I mean, I think eyes are probably this. I mean, certainly if you're measuring this way, the eyes are, right in the middle. I would say eyes probably. Yeah.
And do you, when shaping your novels, we talked about the sound of your character's voice. But is there a moment where you see their faces?
Oh, that's a great question. No, not not in any kind of detail. I don't see them in any kind of detail. But I feel like I would recognize them if I saw them, but it's not like I could sit down and draw or reproduce. Yeah, yeah. And I think that if I did, I mean, for example, I can imagine, using an AI to describe and input language and, all of the kind of descriptive characteristics of the person. And I bet you any image that the AI generated would be wrong. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. We are opening up this for questions, and I can't see fully, but I will see hands if there are any. Anybody who is interested in asking questions here, this is the right time. You probably silenced everybody. Yes, right here.
You were talking about you were talking about your characters,
yeah.
And I've always assumed that an author had more control over them than what you seem to be describing.
Yeah.
You seem to be describing that there's a process of starting them, and then they are creating themselves, and then they can even, like children, turn on you or misbehave or deny you, and I'm wondering what that whole process, I'm kind of shocked by that. It's like, I always thought you were in more control than that, Ruth. I mean, really.
Yeah, I know, you'd think, right? After all these years. I think that, it's both, right? It's both are happening. I mean, for example, with the Now character, she was just very clear to me, and it really was like she had kind of agency of her own. But of course, I mean, I see where she comes from, and I see that she comes from me, right? So, but she has she just had a kind of, yeah. What was it that Vonnegut, that universal will to become, was that, do you remember that? Anyway, she had this will to become, right? But I also did control her in the sense that, I edited her. I edited all of those chapters. I'm a very rigorous editor, and so I really kind of toned down her excesses in a lot of places. And so in that sense, I had a lot of control. But there were certainly enough moments where, and then, for example, I would have an idea that, that she should, that she and her father should get on a bus and go up the mountain. I know where that idea came from. It came from watching a Miyazaki film. And so, it's like I can see that I controlled it. Yeah, that I controlled it. But once they were kind of, what she brought on the bus with her, and once they were kind of, going and the kind of conversation that they were having, it is a little bit like I'm just writing. Yeah, it's just like the characters are kind of acting through me. And then there are the characters who, like the Yumi character, who kind of dig their heels in, and who resist me, and as a result, I can see that they're going to resist the reader as well, right? And so those are the characters who I need to work with more. And to give an example, a concrete example of that, well, Yumi was one, but, and I ended up kind of giving her the book. But the other character was Annabelle in the Book of Form and Emptiness. And with Annabelle, it was very interesting, because that was another moment where I thought that I was going to finally be able to use the omniscient third, to write that voice, not her voice, but to write, to write the book in the omniscient third. But then it ended up that the book was the omniscient third narrator, right? In other words, the omniscient third became a character, right? Refused to stay kind of anonymous, right? Or godlike in that sense, and took on the characteristics, and so it ended up being the book. But to go back to Annabelle, the book is now telling Annabelle's story. The book is now narrating Annabelle's story, and Annabelle is told in the kind of a third person, intimate point of view. So we're very tight in with Annabelle's, mind, and yet the book's attitude towards Annabelle was off, right? The book treated Annabelle with a voice that I later thought of as a kind of fond contempt, right? The book was distancing Annabelle, right? And what was really, so my friend Carol, pointed this out to me. She said, we've seen this before in previous characters, and so we realized it was a problem of irony, using irony as a kind of distancing device. Mm-hmm. And so what ended up happening was that I needed to go back in and literally, it was just kind of finding those little moments of that, that kind of contempt, and going through and weeding them out and softening the book's attitude, and really, working with the book and Annabelle so that so that they would love each other, right? That's really what it boiled down to. And of course, since the part of Annabelle that the book was resisting is actually the part of me, right? What I realized was that voice of fond contempt was a voice that I very often will use towards myself, right? So that I will, I'll say, I'll do something stupid and be like, "Oh, good, Ruth," that one. And so, it's so in that way it becomes very personal, right? It really is about, the book ends up being a mirror, right? The book really does end up being a mirror through which you're studying your own relationship with self and your own relationship with mind. So, yeah.
Yes, there's another question here.
Yeah.
Sure.
Before, when you were talking about silence, I've been thinking about that through the whole thing, and how silence is a language all in itself. I was thinking about Amish shunning someone, or people ghosting people, that is such a negative language. But then there's when you're with someone you love or like a lot, and you're very silent with that person because you're both reading a book or you're whatever, and then it's a very comforting, sharing kind of thing. And then I was thinking about my parents when you were talking about your parents. My mother was very bossy, very large and in charge, never apologized for anything, even when she was so grossly wrong, it was like awful, My father was very, very quiet, totally different from her. And when my sister got married, she's about 5-6 years older than I am. And we were walking back from, we put her in the car. She goes off on her honeymoon with her new husband, and everybody's like, bye, goodbye, We're walking back to the reception place, and my father grabbed my hand. And he held on to it so tightly I could actually almost hear my bones crunching. And I thought, I'm going to have to soak this hand in ice water when I get home. I thought he was going to break my hand. But I thought to myself, shut up. Your father is screaming, shouting as loud as he can how much he loves you right now. He just saw his little princess, I was never the little princess, by the way, drive off into the sunset, and it was sunset. And then he looks at me, and I was a bridesmaid, I was a maid of honor or something, so I'm in a gown, and I look older, and he's thinking, oh my God, she'll go too, And I think he couldn't articulate it, but he could tell me with silence. And it was like one of the most beautiful moments of anybody's life, I think, to have I remember just saying, shut up, and listen, but don't listen with your ears.
Yes.
And so when you were talking about all that silence stuff, I thought, yeah, it's a whole language in itself, what you can do with silence. I wish in politics we would use it more.
Exactly. That's exactly,
there's
that's
times
right.
to just
right.
shut up and not make a big deal of it. If we didn't advertise school shootings, would they happen as much? Yeah. If people were silent about abortion and just said, have your own feelings and keep them to yourself and don't talk, maybe that would be a better way to go. It just seems like silence is kind of undervalued virtue.
I agree. I could not agree with you more. Yeah. No, I think that's really true. And of course, social media and it's amplified now in so many different ways that, that there's just so much noise now. There's so much noise coming at us all the time. Yeah.
Ruth,
yeah.
I want to ask you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a lovely story.
Image,
yeah,
beautiful anecdote. I want to ask you, in the context of this series of democracy and the English language, if you could assess how the English language, the language that you use to bring us into your world or into the world of your characters, has changed since you started writing, or maybe even from the moment you started as a student at Smith, and the various iterations in masks that you have had over time. Language, one of the aspects that you keep on repeating in the face is that from Buddhism you've learned, from life you've learned that nothing is ever static, that we keep on changing, and that survival means adapting to those changes. The language keeps on changing. The language of your students is different from the language of your characters is different from yours. What is this transformation that has gone in the lifetime of Ruth Ozeki of the English language, which ultimately is her one tool to give us these creations?
Well, I mean, I think that there's so many ways that, and most of them are kind of small, specific examples. I mean, for example, pronouns, right? That's a big change, right? Pronouns, I think. And so that's a huge change, right? But I also think, and I think people are, a lot more, I know people are a lot more sensitive and careful about racial slurs. When I was growing up, nobody, it was a free for all. Everybody had every race had a name attached to it, and nobody got spared. So that's changed. For me, and another thing I think related to that is, to some extent anyway, violence, the depiction of violence. I'm very sensitive about that in a way that I wasn't at the beginning. I think that there was a feeling of being, and I know it's not just me, but I think that literature has become a lot less violent in a way. A certain kind of literature, maybe not all literature, but, a certain kind of literature has, I think writers are being more careful about that. And one of the reasons is that publishers are insisting upon it. Now, when you publish a book, you have to have sensitivity readers read the book to make sure that, that you haven't inadvertently or intentionally, but usually it's inadvertently, offended any constituency, right? Just out of carelessness or whatever. And so, that's, I think that writers are being a lot more careful in that way. It's so easy now to be canceled. So I think that is driving a lot of self-censorship.
And on the other hand, there is in media the use of profanity and slurs that didn't used to exist. We were talking in one of the previous iterations of Point Counterpoint with Merriam-Webster publisher that the word fuck was not included in the dictionary until the 70s. It wasn't considered acceptable to have it. And you could say the same thing about the use of slurs and profanities on television, and it's much more accepted. And maybe the violence that has decreased in literature has probably increased in other aspects of social media.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why. I think that those two are, there's a kind of balancing going on. I mean, I'm not saying that all literature, I'm saying that, the kind of book that I write, I'm more sensitive to it, and others, other authors who are writing, writing the same kinds of things and whose concerns are similar to mine, we're just a lot more careful about that kind of thing now. Partly because we don't want to add to the escalation of violence, in the world, I mean, certainly I think in so many other spheres. I mean, when I think about, a show like Game of Thrones, right, the fact that was just on television, I mean, that was really violent. And I have a high tolerance, especially coming from the film industry, so I have a fairly high tolerance for that. But still, it was, it was like, whoa, shocking to me. Yeah.
Ruth, it has been really extraordinary to have you here. It felt intimate and deep and transformative. And as a reader, as a friend, but mostly as a reader, thank you for walking us through how these characters take over you, or you take over the characters, and for bringing them to us and making them part of our lives.
Well, thank you so much, Ilan, and thank you for all you do to support writers and books.
Thank you,
it's wonderful.
And thank you all very much.
And thank
for
you,
coming.
readers. You guys are the most important of all.
Thank you.